This is not a test. This is not a test. Please remain calm.
Unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims. Seeking human victims. Seeking human victims.
Welcome to Seeking Human Victims, Season 1, Episode 2 of The Slashers. This week, we're covering 1981's The Prowler. I am Dan Wilson, your host, and we finally have a full house for the first time this season. Only the second episode in, so not too bad. Muji is back with us. How's it going?
Pretty good. Happy to be here. Happy to watch a movie with two boobs.
Indeed.
Two boobs.
And then, of course, we have the regular crew here at this point. Todd Johnston.
Hey, everybody. I'm back.
Jason Griswold returns.
I'm back as well.
From his holiday sabbatical. And Miss Annie Wilson.
And I also have two boobs.
I can confirm this. So, the slasher craze, last episode I took kind of a left turn on folks and did not start with a traditional slasher film or a traditionally popular slasher film from the 80s, which is sort of the template of where they all really took off. We did Hatchet. We looked at a movie from the early 2000s. And my point with that was to show that the genre still to this day can thrive under the right circumstances. And but now I feel like we do have to start going back and digging into the whole slasher craze of the 80s. And of course, we talked at length about the origin of slasher films on the last episode, but it was really Friday the 13th that popularized them. Halloween influenced Friday the 13th, but Friday the 13th is really where it took off because that movie was made for a very low budget and made a ton of money with a very simple formula that so many studios saw an opportunity to duplicate and make similar money. Some of them were fairly successful at the box office, others were not. But the end result was this litany, this cornucopia of all of these crazy slasher films, varying from super cheesy to super serious to some that were well made to some that were poorly made to some like this, which has a little bit on many different spectrums of that coin.
It's a good mix, I say, of the cheesy and the serious. Or
Absolutely.
at least tries to be serious.
And this one, it's fairly obscure. I find it a bit underrated, but we're going to talk more about that as we get into it. So let's waste no time digging beneath the flesh for the coroner's report.
The Coroner's Report.
Okay, so we certainly will focus heavily on a director's contribution to a film. I think we can safely say that's been a reoccurring theme of each episode. So the director we meet tonight is a gentleman by the name of Joseph Zito. Joseph Zito, pretty well known in the late 80s, but not really so much for horror. He actually went on to have a pretty lengthy career as an action film director, so he'd be most well known really for movies like Missing in Action, the film series that launched Chuck Norris as an action hero, but also Invasion USA, Red Scorpion. But before he launched his illustrious action film directing career, he was a horror director. He actually started his film career as a student at City University of New York. He majored in economics there and went on to earn a master's degree in psychology, but during that time he worked as in the motion picture industry as a director, producer, and writer. And even with his success over time, he actually got to fulfill a childhood fantasy of owning a movie palace, a movie theater, the Sanders Theater in New York City. We meet Joseph Zito here early in his career. He had done previously a horror film called Abduction, and after that a horror film called Blood Rage, not to be confused with the Thanksgiving-themed horror film that we saw on Joe Bob Briggs' Dinners of Death this year, Blood Rage, from Canada, I believe it was, of the story about the twins, the incredibly bonkers.
Very memorable.
It's not cranberry sauce. Not that Blood Rage.
It's a popular title, The Blood Rage.
But he did then direct The Prowler, and that was one of the first movies that really put him on the map. He was actually later selected to direct Friday the 13th Part 4 based on his work in The Prowler, and many consider that to be the best Friday the 13th movie, so pretty interesting. And also, he went on to direct one of my all-time favorite music videos, The Man Behind the Mask from Friday the 13th Part 6 by Alice Cooper.
Yeah, that is one of the all-time great theme songs for a movie. I mean, that was during a time where there were a lot of good. The 80s is really the prime time for the best, like, songs written specifically about the plots of the movies. There's a lot of them in the 80s. But that is definitely one of the best.
And several writers involved here. We just finished watching the Joe Bob Briggs version of this film. So I believe at one point he said there were 6 writers involved. But most prolifically were Glenn Leopold, known most famously for writing The Smurfs and Johnny Quest, and Neil Barbera, son of legendary Hanna-Barbera founder Joseph Barbera. He also wrote many Hanna-Barbera classic cartoons such as Scooby-Doo, The Flintstones. And if you really think about it, with the big reveal at the end, it's almost like a horror version of Scooby-Doo, you know?
Yes!
That's true.
1,000%.
Wandering through several rooms in the house,
And
maybe the same time over.
The police have the same skill as the Scooby-Doo crew as they go through this.
I'm noticing a really big writing credit here. Eric Lewald is one of the 6 writers. He's the only one with a picture on IMDb. He wrote for the X-Men cartoon, so a lot of cartoon writers on this script. So, you know, can't say anything bad about that.
No, I think it might explain some of the, like, throw it to the wall and see if it sticks stuff in the movie that, you know, even when it doesn't work, you sometimes have to admire. On the effects, really what many would consider the saving grace of this film are the special effects. Tom Savini, the legend, he was brought in to do the work on this after just finishing up on Maniac, another movie where his effects work is just off the charts. He had done previously the original Friday the 13th, and of course was brought back with Zito to do Friday the 13th Part 4. And the special effects were such an integral part of the shooting that they would usually take a full day to set up each gag. And the entire shooting schedule was built around the filming of the effects. Savini has said multiple times over he considers this to be his masterpiece of special effects and his best work.
Maybe the fact that it took them all day to set up the effects explains some of the scenes in this movie where they're like, well, Tom's setting up for an effect. Can we just film you walking around somewhere?
Let's wander around for a good hour.
Let's get some shots.
Yeah.
We probably won't use these. They use them.
That next song was, like, real sick, though.
Oh, yeah, there's so many. I think it has maybe 2 or 3 of my favorite slasher kills. The pitchfork in the shower is, like, that first time I saw that, I was just agape at how in 1981 they made that look so realistic. That's just such a display of Tom Savini's talent because, I mean, you have a nude body that you're having to pierce with a foreign object. So there's not, when you have clothes, you can hide things, you know, you can sleight of hand, you can slide stuff under clothes to create the illusion of things disappearing. Not so much when she's butt-ass naked, right? So it really was talented display to pull that off and make it look so realistic and horrific. And then the dagger through the head, which I'm wearing on my t-shirt.
Nice.
Just the end result of that. It's certainly not the most realistic kill because he gets stabbed straight through the brain and sits there like convulsing and twitching and making noises for, you know, a good 2 minutes. But also a part of the movie that really does work effectively is the extra lingering on the kills, because it just adds that extra level of discomfort.
Absolutely, especially on the shower scene. That one just went on and on.
I see where they're going for it, and definitely the special effects and the kills are by far the best part of the movie. And I feel like if the plot was a little bit better, like the kills would mean like even more, because if you were like just really in, then like, you know, like if you added like those kills to like a classic horror movie, like, you know, then it would mean like a lot. In this movie, it still does, but I mean, I can see what they were going for with that. If the rest of the plot would have matched like the intensity that they tried or that they actually achieve on the kills, then I think that they would mean a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel like you didn't really care for any of the people that got murdered. Like, you just know they're the main girl's friends, or people she knew, or like the lady from the dance.
Or they lived in the town.
Yeah, like you don't get to know the characters before they're really violent, lingering murders.
Yeah, they're very disposable. The only ones you really make a connection with are the ones you're supposed to, which is kind of a red herring for where, not even a red herring, but a telltale sign of where it's going.
I would compare that, like, I enjoyed the movie.
We're not to final thoughts yet, Moochie, so you might want to fucking save those.
But I would compare the kills there, though, the lingering on the kills, to, like, there's a lot of movies where we talk about the movie's not awesome, but there's like one actor that's still just fucking going all in, and he doesn't know that he's in a bad movie. These kills don't know that they're in this movie.
So moving on to the casting, that certainly is what fills out any horror movie and can make it what it is. And this one had some interesting casting choices. You had a couple of great character actors, as Joe Bob says, the that guy actor, like you see them and go, oh, it's that guy from that thing. You know them, you just don't necessarily know where you might have seen them from. You have Farley Granger, who's well known for many Hitchcock films. He played the sheriff, who was ultimately revealed to be the killer at the end, and he would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those meddling kids. I wouldn't have got my head blown off with a shotgun.
Yeah. Or he would have gotten away with it if he'd have busted out his fucking shotgun before the pitchfork. I mean, what the fuck?
He liked to savor those kills, I guess.
And then in the lead female role, who turned in the best performance in the movie, Vicki Dawson, as a total babe, Pam McDonald. Only 2 other film credits I could find for her on IMDb. A movie before this, 1981's Carbon Copy, and a 2018 movie that is currently in post-production called False Hopes.
A little bit of a hiatus.
You could say.
She had some PTSD, guys. She just had to get over it.
But she carried the film as far as, you know, you did have a likable protagonist that you wanted to succeed, even if some of the decisions weren't exactly cogent. Then you had Lawrence Tierney, a legendary character actor as Major Chatham, one of the most bizarre characters in the movie because he's this invalid who runs what the fuck is it? I'm blanking.
It's a college?
Well, it's a college dorm, and they had a dance. That's right. There's a dance.
It's a welcome back dance.
Because
A welcome back dance.
They're welcoming back the dancing because they hadn't had dancing. This is pre-Footloose.
right, it was almost a Footloose type scenario, but it was predicated on a murder that had happened back in the 40s, and ever since that murder at the dance, no more dances. Well, they decide they're going to bring the dances back, and apparently Major Chatham is the benefactor in doing so, but he doesn't speak, he doesn't walk, he's wheelchair bound, and he just stares at the girls getting naked through their dorm windows, all leading you to believe that he's probably the guy doing this, or at least behind it, but there's never any payoff to this whatsoever.
No. It's one of the many things in this movie that just is a plot line that they just abandoned at one point. And we're like, we were going to tell you about that, but instead we got the deputy walking around a little bit more.
And then we had Christopher Goutman as Deputy Mark London, who, interesting looking fellow, had a big chiseled jaw, but almost like an Eric Roberts meets Christopher Walken type face. And he had this hair helmet that was just 80s as fuck. He could have been an extra on Chips, even like more late 70s even than 80s. But interestingly enough, he was a nobody at this point. He went on to become a huge player in the soap opera world as he produced and directed 2,000 episodes of As the World Turns. Was also involved in All My Children.
It's got to be the bulk of the series right there.
I mean, did he just create the show?
Well, it started in 99, so no. I would say not.
And then you had Cindy Weintraub as Lisa, who meets her end in the pool in the previously mentioned throat sawing scene. She also had a bit of a horror pedigree, starring in Humanoids from the Deep. And the Prowler himself, the physical killer, was actually played by 3 different people, as it often is in these films. When you have a masked killer, it's often whoever is most convenient for when they're shooting the scene. So assistant director Peter Giuliano was one who stalked around and chased some of the victims. Tom Savini wore the uniform to perform the close-ups of the kills because he could actually do the effects while he was performing the kill. And then Farley Granger, of course, played him in the scene where he was unmasked. The film was scored by noted 80s composer Richard Einhorn. The location is interesting because in his action films, Zito became known for his love of setting films in exotic, faraway lands. So naturally, he went to Cape May, New Jersey.
Such as New Jersey.
He'd originally wanted to shoot it in Avalon, California, where the film is set, but it was decided that he would shoot in New Jersey instead because it had a ghost town quality, and it was shot over a period of 6 weeks, and each consisted of 6 days' work. It was filmed using the city's Victorian buildings. The Colonial Hotel was one of the locations, as well as the Emlyn Physic Estate. That was the home of Major Chatham.
Dude, I mean, I'm just thinking about this. I guess I missed the part in the movie where it said it was set in California. But if you wanted to make it look like California and not New England, you couldn't have done a worse job. Like the buildings are reading off. It's like, you can only find these buildings in the United States in the Northeast.
No, I think it was, the town was like, what was the town it was supposed to be that he wanted to shoot in?
It was supposed to be California.
Avalon.
Avalon. It was like Avalon Bay, I think is what it was.
Yes.
It was Avalon Bay and not Avalon. I don't think they said it was Avalon Bay, California.
Yeah, it might not have been. I think that may just be where he originally set it in. I don't know how accurate that is. I need to double fact check that. That came from Wikipedia in my research, which this was some damned in-depth research.
Joe Bob said during the movie
Confirmed by Joe Bob.
Well,
that they named it
That's
that
2 sources.
in reference to the fact that they originally wanted to film it in Avalon off of Catalina Island. So it's not supposed to be California. It's just a shout out to California.
Well, that's good.
that makes much more
It
sense.
does not fucking look like California.
And the cemetery scene, it was shot at an actual cemetery on Halloween night of 1980, and the open grave used in the film was an actual open grave in the cemetery that was awaiting a funeral.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Was it a real casket? I mean, obviously it was a real casket, but
Was it a used casket? Is that what you're saying?
did they just like leave it in the hole for the next morning?
Oh, man, I don't think they can do that.
Well, as far as pre-production, I don't think we're going to get any more odd than that, so you know what time it is.
Step right up and enter a world where the mortal man will find facts that defy imagination. What strange truths and morbid curiosities will be revealed inside the auditorium.
Okay, well, so we just learned that they desecrated a grave for their art, which I coincidentally have been a part of doing at least once. I think all good artists should, desecrate a grave at least once.
I mean, like, the normal person may not like it, but I mean, if one of us were like, dude, my grandma died back in 93, buried in the Prowler grave, I mean, that'd be pretty cool.
But is it considered a grave if they haven't buried anybody in it yet?
Good question. I mean, if it's owned by them, I guess.
But if they haven't put anybody in it, it's just
It's a plot.
It's a burial plot.
And this podcast is over.
And we're fired. We've been canceled.
But I mean, let's be real. If somebody was like, my grandma died and they're not putting her in the hole until next week, and I had a movie to film, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to go fucking shoot that hole.
Well, let's move around. Let's move around. Here we go. Shooting schedule.
I mean, if they already dug the hole but haven't put anybody there yet.
I mean, I once shot a vignette with the Wild Side production crew where they set a tombstone on fire for Jimmy Mitchell, the sinister minister, and I mean, we just snuck in a graveyard and found a random tombstone and poured some lighter fluid on it. I mean, it was fine. There's no lasting damage, but yeah, I mean, you sometimes have to take risks for your art, Muji.
Such as risking arson charges.
And desecrating a grave.
Right? Yeah.
That's not even the only
That's at least 2 crimes.
arson story involved.
Used to be able to bury somebody without the thought of some assholes coming and setting your tombstone on fire to promote their fake fights, but this is not the world we live in anymore, fellas.
Frank Zito, more odd facts about Frank Zito. In 1985 and 1986, he spent a year in pre-production on the canon version of Spider-Man, a film that was never made.
No.
Can you imagine canon, Golan and Globus, the makers of such films as Death Wish, making a Spider-Man movie?
That sounds awesome, actually. Come on.
It would probably be awesome, but he would be like, you would hear just people quoting, with great power comes great responsibility, and be like, but you never knew about Uncle Ben dying? That would be the version of that movie. They would leave that out.
I'll say this: they made Chuck Norris a star. We all love Invasion USA, so let's give something that never existed a chance, fellas.
Yeah. There's been so many reboots of the franchise. Like, what's one more gonna do?
I want to see a 1985 Spider-Man directed by Frank Zito, or Joseph Zito, rather.
Sounds incredible.
I don't know why I keep wanting to call him Frank.
Oh,
like,
no.
I'm obsessed with
Frank
calling him
Zito.
Frank.
That's a real person.
Frank Zito.
The only other Zito you've ever heard of.
That's probably why. On the audio commentary for the DVD, Zito said that he hated the props used for Rosemary's photo album and the tombstone so much that he was apprehensive about even allowing the film to be released on DVD. He said that he always felt the props were painfully fake looking, and avoided coverage on them as much as possible while shooting.
They looked about the same as everything else in that movie. It wasn't really glaringly obvious or anything.
It was a fucking fantastic transfer of the film. It looked great, and honestly, you really usually notice those flaws on a better transfer of those old movies, but I did not. I thought...
No, I mean, I wasn't looking for anything fake looking, and and obviously we know from making our one short now that, you notice more of the defects than anybody else. But yeah, just watching the movie, like, not looking for anything, like, I didn't notice anything that was super fake.
I didn't at any point while she was looking at that photo album be like, oh, it looks so super fake. Like,
No, you just thought, why is she fucking digging through these photos? What does it have to do with anything?
right. I was trying to figure out why she went into Nancy Drew mode for no reason. I wasn't trying to determine if those were real photos or not.
More Zito facts as far as his shot choices and editing choices. The shot of the Prowler placing a rose on Sherry's head while Pam is changing in the next room was originally shot as part of Sherry's murder, but it was edited into the film later to create more tension for the scene in which Pam returns to the girls' room. And speaking of Pam, Vicky Dawson inexplicably wears a wedding ring throughout the entire movie.
I'm taken.
By Jesus.
Apparently there was going to be the sequel where her boyfriend fucking came after the deputy dude.
Mark.
Yeah, there you go. Mark. That was his name.
Mark Zito.
And then Tom Savini, a lot of great auditorium facts about his work here. The pitchfork for the double impalement, of course, wasn't long enough. Joe Bob talks about this on his feedback, but it's pretty obvious because it goes all the way through two bodies. And like Annie mentioned, it was long enough to go through one body and then stick in the other one. But it goes actually all the way through two. So that was a little bit of a noticeable hiccup, but still a great kill scene regardless. And then also Tom Savini actually did shoot a double barrel shotgun into George Fraser's fake head to make it explode in the finale of the movie. Although you can't see it on screen, Savini said only half of the fake head was actually destroyed in the shot.
That was a really good payoff because a lot of the movie leading up to that part was real boring.
Yeah, it was necessary, really. Like it had not been for the head exploding scene, I don't think the movie would land as much with me as it does because there's a lot working against it. But that is such a great payoff to the whole thing. It's like, well, there's your Prowler. He's fucking.
Totally worth it.
I also though, where was that his own? Did they both have sawed-off double barrel shotguns? Because guy came in and was like, phew, and then he still had it in his right hand.
Yeah, I think
He still had it in his hand.
Yeah.
We see the Prowler when he's getting ready for his prowling business, getting his weapons ready. He does have the double barrel. He's getting ready there.
So they both have guns.
Yeah, he was just waiting the whole time, like, I want to keep this a fair fight. I don't want to pull out a gun. And then once he got fucking shot point blank range of the chest, he's like, I guess it's gun time.
He has his own code of honor.
I guess he's like, it's time to have this young girl force me to kill myself.
It took 18 takes of Cindy Weintraub being kicked in the face by the Prowler before director Joseph Zito was satisfied that he had a good take. Fortunately, the boots were made of rubber and they didn't really hurt.
That scene was hilarious.
Oh, it's totally unexpected. I mean, it's such a great choice. Like, again, it's things like that despite all of its flaws, I love this movie because it's like this chick swimming, she walks up to the thing, oh, he's just gonna kick her in the fucking face with a combat boot. It's not traditional slasher fare.
Well, first of all, who goes to their apparently college prom and then is like, I'm just gonna go swimming. Well, first, like, there shouldn't be a college prom. What is that? But if your college does have a welcome back graduation dance, then
Yada, yada, yada.
right, then you
Et
should
cetera.
then you should not be. You should be there and not swimming.
She just wanted to cool off. They expressed that in the film.
It's just so hot in that dance.
Apparently, Farley Granger had a difficult time with Tom Savini creating the cast of his face because he was extremely claustrophobic and he had to put his entire case in a plaster mold, of course. And apparently there was some scraping and clawing and screaming and fighting, and it caused Granger much stress, apparently. Couple of other interesting facts here.
Do you have any more Zito facts?
There are more Zito facts.
Did you know that the best boy was Don Zito?
Well, hopefully they didn't let any of the younger best boys around Don Zito. But Joseph Zito now works in television in the United Arab Emirates, so still has a career in the entertainment industry, just not in the United States. And the movie time newsreel footage used during the opening of the film is an assembly of World War II footage made to resemble the Fox Movietone news from back in the day. And Tierney, he had a reputation, apparently, even though he won an Oscar for Best Picture in his days of being in Cecil DeMille pictures. Long past him, he had a bit of reputation as an alcoholic. So they cast him in a non-speaking role in a wheelchair. And so apparently, write the rest of that for yourself because he took advantage of that and was apparently a blubbering mess on the set of The Prowler.
Would have been a smooth shoot otherwise, I'm sure.
Little known fact, he didn't even, that grabbing scene wasn't even planned. He was just so drunk. He was like, help me.
Hey, baby.
That's a joke, guys. That's not a real fact.
Seriously, though, I mean, maybe they thought that having a big name actor like Joseph Tierney would draw people to Prowler, but that guy maybe did like one day of work. It's like you got to show him in the window, then you show him outside.
Show him grabbing with his O.J. Simpson gloves on,
and his lap blanket.
And then in the scene where it appears she gets away on 3 separate occasions, but like every single time, like for some reason steps like right back to him within his range.
Yeah, I feel like she could have taken that old man in a wheelchair. I don't know why she had to struggle for so long.
Yeah, he had a hell of a grip.
Right?
Yeah,
those
he had
gloves.
one strong hand.
That was a pimp hand.
The movie has a very similar plot to My Bloody Valentine. It's and Footloose, as we mentioned. It's once banned, dance celebration returns, and the killings start again as soon as it comes back.
Maybe that was the problem, is that all of the good holidays were gone, where they're like, man, they did it on Valentine's Day. What's a holiday nobody's done? What about welcome back to dance graduation day? Sure.
Sounds great. As long as there's a World War II element, I'm in.
And if we could get one of those like green army men toys, but make it like got a butthole face, then I am down.
There he is. So the movie had a varying degree of success. Let's talk about the numbers. Alright, Muji. You're back. I've had to do all this fucking math all by myself for weeks upon weeks. And you're usually my correspondent, my go-to, my number man, my ace in the hole for Numbers of the Beast. What do you got for me?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. They got offered $750,000 for this movie and they didn't take it. That was a big fucking mistake. Apparently, that movie cost $1 million to produce. Which I could see, because it was probably expensive to rent all of those awesome houses, and then, Tom Savini didn't come cheap. But the movie didn't make much money at all. It apparently took years and years and years later of like DVD releases and Blu-rays to supposedly become profitable, but it didn't make shit.
You don't say.
Yeah, I couldn't actually ever find. It was one of those movies where they've seemingly hidden the profits because there's no box office totals. You can find budgets for like how much it costs, but box office totals were nowhere to be found.
Yeah, I just think it just didn't get a wide enough release because they didn't go through the normal distribution channels. It didn't get a wide enough release to where anybody like tracked it that well. According to the director, that all these years later, it ended up turning a profit, but there's really no numbers to back anything up. I mean, you assume $1 million. I mean, that thing's been released on video and DVD, Blu-ray. It's probably safe to assume that at a certain point it became profitable, but
I'd imagine it became profitable during video rentals because that's when they were still making a pretty good amount of money off renting stuff, and it was a pretty big. All of those 80s, one-off slashers were pretty big rentals.
Yeah, I mean, I rented it, in the early 90s, so it was still like at a local video store the first time I saw it. So, I mean, if you're hanging around for that long, then that's probably where the majority of the money came from. Like I said, obviously, the fact that there's no box office information to be found after all this digging means it probably didn't make much at the actual box office. But if it turned a profit eventually, then, that's a lot better than a lot of movies did.
It may have also been hindered by the fact that 2 more superior slasher films came out that year. Actually, many more slasher films came out that year, but just to name a couple, My Bloody Valentine, as we mentioned, Friday the 13th Part 2, one of my favorite of the Friday the 13th franchise, and Maniac. We just learned that Tom Savini had just finished working on that, and we know that is quite a ride in its own. So had a lot of competition that year. The theatrical release, so really 1981 was the year of the slasher in many ways. The trend was at its peak of popularity. So for the initial theatrical release, it was released independently in the U.S. by Sandhurst Films, and then in Australia and Europe, it was released under the title Rosemary's Killer. Joe Bob said that it was because that there was not a translation in multiple other languages for Prowler. So Rosemary's Killer it was. And it was only recently discovered that the Prowler was re-released to a handful of theaters in North and South Carolina in 1984 under the title Pitchfork Massacre. It's still unknown who the distributor was, and they most likely did not have the legal rights to show the film, so they snuck in and out and made a little bit of money. So that may be another reason we don't know why. But what the ultimate totals were on the box office is because there were people pirating it and selling it under another title. And then just a couple of notes about international releases and such. The German version omits almost all of the gore scenes, including the revelation of the killer's identity.
Ugh.
To make the film make even less sense.
That would be unwatchable, right?
And it replaced the soundtrack with bird sounds for the daytime scenes and cricket sounds for the nighttime scenes. And Richard Einhorn's score was totally removed, and they added synthesizer music from an uncredited musician.
Why?
And that version goes under the title The Pitchfork of Death. Or Die Forke des Todes. And they also, of course, ran afoul of the British film commissions and critics with all the video nasties going on at the time.
Video nasties.
And most of the murders were trimmed out in the British release as well. It has been released on home video several times. We saw it on VHS for years in the Blockbusters and mom and pop video stores. But Blue Underground released an uncut version on DVD in 2002 and on Blu-ray in 2010. And I believe there is a Scream Factory DVD coming, if there hasn't already been one. The extras in the Blu-ray included a trailer, a still, and a poster gallery, and behind-the-scenes gore footage with Tom Savini, which that reel has been released on YouTube. You need to check that out. It's a very cool insight onto how a lot of those practical effects were filmed. Not one and done stuff. There's a lot of okay, sit there. All right, move the shot, get this facial expression, and you can see then how they edit it all together to get the kill. So I thought that was rather insightful and something you really ought to check out. I think we'll probably share that on the One Good Scare social media as well in the lead up to this as we're promoting the podcast episode. And the final thing about the release of the film and the numbers and the reception, Zito once told a guard in a movie theater where the film was screened that he was the director of The Prowler. The guard was very impressed by this, and he responded, "You really did kill all those people, right?" So Tom Savini's effects so effective, at least he convinced this one fucking guy that it might have been a snuff film.
Then again, he was a security guard at a movie theater, so...
We pass no judgments here.
Someone's got to do it.
Security guards at movie theaters listen to horror podcasts, and they're all welcome.
But do they all ask horror movie directors, did they really kill all them people?
So, the plot to this one, it's interesting. So if you couldn't understand it, we're going to do our goddamnedest to make sense of it on the burial plot.
It is now time to uncover the burial plot. In 1944, Rosemary broke up with her boyfriend while he was deployed. She just couldn't wait. There were too many other boys. In 1945, the war in Europe ends, so she's attending a dance where the young men really know how to romance.
Sweetheart, that car doesn't do you justice.
Rosemary and her new man go to the point to make out, when suddenly all of the decorative lights go out. That should have been a warning. They should have called abort. Instead, they are impaled by a pitchfork whose prongs are far too short.
Yeah, it's like a foot too short.
Now it's 1980. 35 years have advanced. Pam and her friends are decorating for the hilariously named Welcome Back Graduation Dance. After learning of a killer being on the loose in a neighboring town, the sheriff announces he's going on a fishing trip. But have no fear, poor man's Christopher Walken, aka Deputy Mark, is on the job, and he's been deputy for 2 whole years.
The deputy, he's a good boy. And damn right it's my fishing trip. If you bother me about anything, I'll kick your ass right across the state line.
Back at the dorm, Sally informs Lisa that staring right at them is none other than Rosemary's father, old Major Chatham.
Oh, he's harmless. He's in a wheelchair. Oh yeah? Well, look at these tits, Chatham. Woo!
After the flashing, everyone leaves for the dance, leaving Sherry behind. A pitchfork in the shower is how she'll meet her demise. Pam has spilled punch all over her at the dance, and now she's a mess, so she heads back to the dorm to change into a new dress. Pam realizes she's being followed. She hears footsteps, the creaking of old balls. What is that she sees? It's a World War II veteran with a pitchfork and a sword.
I better run. I'm being stalked. I mean prowled. I think he's a prowler.
Pam escapes the dorm, and it appears she's gotten away, but there's old Major Chatham trying to ruin her day.
Damn it! He's got me with his strong hand! The strong hand!
She runs into Deputy Mark, who says he will investigate. He puts her in a very unsecure jeep just to wait, and after what feels like about 9 hours...
Find anything?
I found wheelchair marks. And boot tracks, too.
Mark slowly searches the dorm, then they break into Chatham's place as they move at what seems to be an old turtle's place. Inside, Pam decides to start searching through all of the Chatham's things. She turns into Columbo. She connects tonight's Prowler to a case from long ago.
I found a Rose. Major Chatham's daughter's name was Rose. Wait for it. Rosemary.
Yeah.
Rose is short for Rosemary.
Yep, quite the revelation that is.
And there was a rose on Rosemary when she died, and they never found the killer. And it's 35 years later. Don't you see how it all fits?
Hell no, I don't.
I guess you're right. I mean, had we discovered Sherry dead in the shower with a rose on her, then this would all connect and make sense. But without that, what I'm saying really sounds like some far-fetched bullshit at this point, huh?
Yep.
Meanwhile, back at the dance...
Everyone may have your attention, please. We need everyone to stay inside and not leave the dance. This means no swimming, as it is apparently customary to swim at a welcome back graduation dance. We have a prowler outside. I repeat, someone is prowling.
There is a disturbance at the cemetery, so Mark and Pam go to investigate. After some very slow walking, they discover Lisa's dead body in Rosemary's grave. They head back to the Chatham's house where...
Excuse me, Mr. Narrator. May I take over?
Of course, Mr. Cosell. Oh my God, it's an honor to call this one with you. Go right ahead.
Mark is slowly walking. Pam is slowly walking. Prowler, slowly prowling. Mark, slowly walking. Pam is... Wait. There's Rosemary's corpse in the fireplace. And there is the Prowler.
It's the Prowler. He has a rose. My theory, however flimsy it may have been, has been proven true. I am redeemed.
Pam runs. Prowler prowls. Pam hides. The Prowler prowls. Pam hides again. The Prowler has found his pitchfork. Pam is in trouble. Oh shit! Out of nowhere, it's the creepy convenience store worker with the save. He shoots the Prowler. The Prowler is down. I repeat, the Prowler is down. Oh no, Prowler has a gun! Prowler has a gun! He shoots the creepy convenience store worker. Prowler had a gun the whole damn time. Pam and Prowler wrestle for the gun. The Prowler has been unmasked. The Prowler is the sheriff. Apparently, the fish were not biting. Pam takes control, pulls the trigger. Oh my goodness, the Prowler's face has been blown to bits. Prowler's face is scattered all over the room. Pam wins. Pam wins. Pam wins.
The end. Or at least it should have been. Pam goes back to the dorm and discovers Sherry and her boyfriend dead in the shower. Nice jump scare, dude. Now, the end.
And that was the burial plot. So we kind of, sort of explained what was going on in that movie.
As best could be done.
I mean,
It didn't have no plot, right?
No, it did have a plot. It had a plot. It just went in some very crazy directions in some places and didn't go in any directions in some other places. But all of that said, I love the film. So I guess that's a great segue to hit our final thoughts here. No, by technical standards or story standards or a lot of standards, it's not a good movie. But it has a lot of things that are endearing to me. Most importantly, the effects, of course, as we've discussed. I think it's a masterclass in effects from Tom Savini. But also, some of the characters were endearing. I thought the lead actress, Vicki Dawson, was fantastic. I thought even the dumb deputy was somewhat likable. Like, you didn't completely hate him and just want to see him butchered. I like that they did treat the material seriously, so they had some really good ideas that maybe weren't fully fleshed out. So you had a lot of ambling around, and I think that is the worst part of the movie for me. But all of that said, it's got some attitude, and it's got some spunk, and it's got character in all the right places, and it's one of my favorite, really unheralded 80s slashers that are not very good, because there's a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, for all of its flaws, I still enjoyed the movie, and the special effects are so good that, I mean, I'll watch it again. This isn't like the last time I'll watch the movie or anything. So, I mean, there are many horror movies that, especially slasher movies from the 80s, that can't say that much. That, you know, they're one and dones. And like I said, even though the plot was just completely, you know, unfinished, there were so many different, like, storylines that they didn't finish. And the main storyline, like, even the things that made sense to us, like, should not have made sense to the characters. Like, you know, like, they've had all sorts of, like, things they did where there was no motivation for them to do, you know, what they were doing. But, like I said, with that said, it still, you know, had that creepy, you know, we love 80s slashers. It still felt like one. It still had that creepy feeling. Like I said, the special effects are so good that just, you know, seeing those makes it worth watching. So, yeah, I mean, even though it had a lot of problems, it was still a fun watch. I would still recommend it for anybody. Like I said, I think other than the script not making all the most sense. The biggest thing that is weird is that it doesn't seem like it knows what it wants to be. Like in some parts, it's trying to be serious, but in other parts, it's like if it would have just went complete fun slasher route, I think that it would have probably been even, a more enjoyable movie. But like I said, it was still enjoyable, even with all like the problems that it had. I still liked it, and I'll watch it again.
I want to say I enjoyed this movie, and maybe I did in the sense that it was, flashing moving pictures for, like 85 minutes. But I think it's a very wasted 85 minutes in the sense of there were a lot of characters in that movie you wanted to die, and this could have been a total Tom Savini gore fest, and it could have been a fun, good-natured romp. But so many people were left unkilled. And I'm going to tell you something. When you find out that this was written by cartoon writers, it makes so much more sense because this thing could have wrapped up in 22 minutes. Very easily. So, yeah, go ahead and watch it. It's good for a Friday night, hanging out with your buddies, like so many slasher films. But, I definitely wouldn't say it's the best I've ever seen. I can't think of the worst I've ever seen. This certainly wouldn't be the worst, but there's better out there.
I had no idea what this movie was or was about or anything about it other than the fact that you ordered a t-shirt and that's all I knew about it is what's on your shirt right now. And so I asked the question before we started watching, am I going to hate this movie? Or actually, no, I said, will I like this movie? And your face told me I was going to hate it. Immediately. I was like, oh, okay, so the answer is no, I'm going to hate this. Okay. So I went in expecting to not like it. I wouldn't say I loved it. Like, it's not my new favorite movie at all, but I had a good time watching it. I would say definitely watch it at least once, of course. I mean, I don't know how many times we can jerk off Tom Savini in this final thoughts segment here.
Oh, we can do it a lot.
We can do it at least 5 times. Of course, everything was great on his end because when is it not? I mean, I'm sure we can find examples. But I would watch it at least once if you've never seen it. It's not going to be the best movie you've ever seen. It's by far not going to be the worst movie you've ever seen if you watch a lot of movies. And I'm left with a lot of questions, but I feel like that's everybody who watches this movie. Watching it with friends is great, especially if you suspend your don't talk during the movie rules, because you're going to want to make some witty remarks during this movie. It just calls for it. But yeah, I don't regret watching it.
I would also recommend this movie. It was a fun watch. Of course, we've already mentioned Tom Savini, so I won't go into that too much more. I have a theory about the title of this movie, The Prowler. There's a lot of prowling happening throughout the movie, and I think past the 1 hour mark, the main characters don't know that there's murders going on. They just know that there's a prowler about. And there's a lot of creeps that come around prowling that aren't the prowler. Like there's these old men that come around creeping around prowling. So I think they try to really hammer in that theme that this movie is called The Prowler.
Them old men, they heard, oh, prowling's the thing now. Like, they heard it was okay, so.
'Twas a real whodunit.
Yeah, it really is like, the town seemed like, other than the people that went to the college, there were only about 5 people that lived there, and 4 of them were true creeps.
Yeah.
That were
Lots
constantly
of
prowling.
And I have one more, this may be our final Zito fact for the night.
But wait, there's more.
There's more. Frank Zito, as referred many times throughout the podcast, he was a Sicilian-American mobster who controlled criminal activities in central and southern Illinois for over 20 years. So.
And did not direct
no connection to this film whatsoever.
Yeah. There's, I guess, a couple other things I could add. I do kind of like the atmosphere, like the misty New England town. And honestly, I think I probably would have liked an entire slasher movie without the time jump. I thought the movie looked better, and like the dated 40s flashback I thought looked amazing and was even probably more interesting of a setting than fast forwarding it to the 80s. So I mean, I love that was in there, but I think, hell, it could have even been more. So yeah, I think those are all solid thoughts and gives a nice spectrum of opinions on the film. We had some that liked it, some that didn't, some that were in the middle. But certainly a critical entry into the 80s slasher pantheon. And speaking of that, we'll be back with more 80s slashers next week. Oh, and before we go, I do, since we've jerked off Tom Savini enough, as Annie mentioned, I do have to tell my quick Tom Savini story, because I did make a fucking total ass out of myself in front of Tom Savini one time.
He tried to jerk his dick.
He tried to actually legitimately jerk him off.
Oh no, it was years ago. It was at Dragon Con. I believe like my second Dragon Con, and I was like mid-late 20s and was real fucked up. Because I would go to Dragon Con to get fucked up and then go mingle around, and I, was treated as a celebrity there, so it was like just fucking heaven, I was like paid to be there and get hammered and go walk around and talk to Lou Ferrigno and all these other fucking people. It was great. So I walk up to Tom Savini, and he's got his table out and all of his nice merchandise is laid out there, and I walk up and I'm looking at stuff, and he was talking to somebody. I guess he turns around and looks at me, and I'm just so fucking hammered, of course. I just start marking out, Tom Savini, whoa, come on, sex machine! Like from fucking the vampire movie. That's not.
That's it.
He just looks at me like just totally disgusted, and is nice and professional. Is like, hi, how you doing? You could tell he was tired of dealing with drunk people on that day. And I was one of those, which I hate, sloppy, obnoxious fucking drunks. So for that, I apologize, Tom Savini.
And for that, I didn't get to meet Tom Savini. Because we just noped out of there at that point. We're like, and bye.
We're gone. Now this is awkward. See ya. So I owed it to Tom Savini to verbally fillet him on this episode as repayment for offending him terribly at Dragon Con 2007. So we've got more slashers coming up next week. Thanks everybody for joining us. Anything else before we wrap it up, guys?
I would just like to say it's good that you made reparations with Tom Savini today. Maybe on the next episode you'll make reparations with the person whose grave you set on fire. Bye!
This is not a test. This is not a test. Please remain calm.
Unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims. Seeking human victims.